So here we have a chord progression that represents a circle of fifths sequence. You may remember our discussion of circle of fifths sequences in terms of using seventh chords. Well, this is similar to that, except it's actually a much simpler version. This one uses just triads. Let's go and take a listen to how this sounds. One thing you may notice is that I'm alternating between root position triads and first inversion triads, and the reason I've done that is to really just kind of allow a little bit more continuity in the bass line rather than doing all the jumps of fourths and fifths that it would do if these chords were all in root position. Another element I'd like to draw your attention to is the voicing or the doubling that we've done in this 2 diminished 6 chord. We remember from typical voicing of diminished triads that we try to double the third of the triad, but here we've actually doubled the root. And the reason we've doubled the root, it actually works here because of how a sequence itself operates. Remember, a sequence, it takes a pattern and kind of replicates it in succession, right? So the pattern set up by the first 2 chords here shows us that in the second chord, or in the first inversion chord, we've actually doubled the root of that chord. So that pattern shows up in the second of this pair, in the second of this pair with the 3/6, again a doubled root. Okay, and so because of that, we justify the use of the doubled root at the end of this pair as well here with the 2/6. And in a sequential pattern, that's when we can really get away with that kind of thing. So we can kind of skip the normal doubling rules. You'll also notice, though, I did mention that, again, we're alternating between root position and first inversion. I've stopped that alternation, of course, going from the root position 5 to 1. I've just gone ahead and opted for just the root position there just because it's a cadential point. So now what I'd like to do is have you notice that we've left some space here between most of these pairs of chords. And the reason is we're going to approach each of these chords in the sequence with, you guessed it, secondary dominants. So what I'd like you to do is go ahead and pause here and see if you can insert some secondary dominants leading, in this case, to 4, another one leading to 7, another one leading to 3, and another one leading to 6. Now, the reason we're going to stop there, we're not going to have a secondary chord leading to the 2 because it is a diminished triad. Remember, secondary chords, or secondary dominant, secondary leading tones, they'll really be used to lead to major or minor triads. And since this one's diminished, I've gone ahead and you see there's no space here. In any event, we'll go straight from the 6th chord into the 2 diminished 6. So again, take a try at putting in your own secondary dominants here. Again, notice the continuity of the bass line. See if you can use secondary dominants, perhaps inversions thereof, to give us a smooth bass here. Okay, so a secondary dominant here, 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 and here. And when we come back, we will compare that to what I came up with. So here's what I came up with. You'll see that in using secondary dominants as 7th chords, I've come up with a very curious pattern here. I have a 5/4-2 chord of 4, a 5/6-5 chord of 7, 5/4-2 of 3, 5/6-5 of 6. Well, that should be very familiar from our study of circle of fifths sequences using 7th chords. This was one of our alternating patterns, 4/2 alternating with 6/5. And the reason I've chosen that was that it gives me a very nice fluid bass line, right? It's a general descent downward with some upward motion as well, okay? And then, of course, very stepwise until I get to my final cadential area, okay? And then, of course, that 5/7-1, of course, being a leap. And then I've got some really exciting tenor things happening as well, too. Some chromatic motion and an overall descent with, again, some trips upward, very similar to the bass, okay? And then lots of common tone work in the upper 2 voices here. So let's take a listen what this one sounds like. Here it is again, just a bit faster so we can, again, appreciate some more of this chromatic activity. Now, this works out well. It's a nice way to embellish a good circle of fifths sequence. But what happens if I just take away the target chords? Now look what I'm left with. I've got the situation where I've got these secondary dominants which don't actually resolve to their target chords. Instead, they resolve to another secondary dominant, to another secondary dominant, to another secondary dominant, right? And one of the ways I can get away with that is if you look at the actual, the anatomy of this chord, it does have a root that would serve as the root of the target chord, right? So in that sense, there is this kind of way of getting to something like the chord. It just happens to be altered in such a way that it's acting as a secondary dominant. So what is this madness? Well, let's take a listen. Listen to that again. We just have this crazy like chromatic descent in the tenor line, very chromatic like descent in the bass line, right? And then it all kind of fits together. Let's listen again. And then just to clean this up just a little bit, remember how I said we could double the root in this diminished chord because of how it was doubled in the previous iterations of the sequence? Well, those chords that form the iteration of that sequence are gone now. So now it probably makes sense to go ahead and voice this in a more traditional way. So I think what I'll do is accomplish that by just kind of graduating this into a half diminished 6/5. Okay. You'll also notice that I did not take away the 6th chord. Remember, I didn't use a secondary dominant after it, so this will help me kind of get into that 2-6-5 chord as well. So now let's listen to it. Pure musical chromatic madness. But it all works. I've got a lot of chromatic notes thrown in here, but it all still fits together within this world of A minor.